Hello, how's it going? So here today talking about our reading out of the book Queering the Color Line by Somerville. Queering the Color Line probably takes our topics of diversity, particularly sexuality and race, to its limits. It takes it, way out into maybe a type of theoretical analysis that you may not be completely familiar with or completely used to. And that's why, I like to talk about this kind of stuff a little bit towards the end of the semester once you've had all the basics, right? But Queering the Color Line introduces you to the idea of queer theory. And queer theory is a theoretical perspective, per se, that has come out of postmodernism in the 80s and 90s. And the main objective of queer theory is to deconstruct, and to deconstruct along the lines of gender and sexuality. Okay. So whereas your traditional ways of thinking about the world come from like positivism and empiricism, that those theories that evolve out of positivism and empiricism are meant to predict the world, right? Like be able to explain things and predict things. You have critical theory, which is to the main, so you have like critical race theory, feminism, things like that. And critical theory is the goal of critical theory is to emancipate, like to set free oppressed groups. Postmodernism is the main goal is to deconstruct those theories, in general. So to challenge more so a positivistic line of thinking of, the world can be determined, the world can be predicted, there are neat and tidy boxes that we all kind of fall into. Postmodernism is the opposite of that. The boxes that you are talking about are actually just socially constructed. Anyway, that's the background here, okay? So queer theory basically emerged, so we're talking about probably like in the late 90s, 2000s, as a site, and I was reading, I'll read a little bit out of your text here, a site which the very assumption of the utility of stable sexual orientations such as gay or lesbian have undergone critique. So queer theory oftentimes focuses on sexuality and says this idea that there are these like specific types of sexualities. There's gay, there's lesbian, there's straight. They said that's not necessarily how things play out in the real world. We think of things that way for sure, and we may identify it that way. But those categories don't really play out that neat and tidy in the real world. Sometimes they may, but a lot of times they don't. That's the argument here. That's the argument. So sexuality is thought about through a queer theorist lens as just a kind of the set of practices that one, engages in at any given time as far as sex goes or sexuality goes, okay? Different than sexual identity. So one may identify as straight, okay? But their sexuality, what folks are doing, may not specifically align with their identity as straight or gay or lesbian or whatever, all right? And so queer theory tries to kind of strip us from the boxes that we put ourselves in, don't always coordinate with what we're actually doing, thinking, whatever, wanting, that kind of thing. Does that make sense? The two do sometimes walk hand in hand, oftentimes walk hand in hand. My straightness does also play out in sexuality, let's just say. For example, I'm not trying to get weird here, but they're different. To a queer theorist, sexuality and sexual identity, two different things. Okay. So what does race have to do with all this, you may be asking? Okay. So instead of thinking about race as a fixed quality or characteristic of a person, through queer theory or through like more of a constructionist lens, race becomes a historical ideological process rather than a fixed trans-historical or biological characteristic. So race, not in this through this lens, not a biological characteristics, not a biological characteristic, not a trans-historical thing, right? Race is a historical and ideological construct that's changed over time, and we've talked about that in this class so far. Racialization is then brought up, right? Racialization to the constructivist or the queer theorist, the postmodernist, is the process through which a group becomes racialized, okay? So, so as far as whites go, okay, there's a lot of different groups historically that were not considered white along the way of our country, okay? The Italians, Jews, the Irish, right, were not, well, pretty long ago, in the 1800s or whatever, weren't considered white. But through a historical process, people changed categories, and now those folks are considered white. So that process through which one becomes racialized is racialization. So main point here, you're thinking, okay, what's going on? What Somerville argues here is that with the birth of modern science through the 1800s, okay, we saw the invention of the homosexual, okay? Homosexual practices, okay, now we're talking back to sexuality. Homosexual practices have gone on since the beginning of time and will always go on for the rest of humanity. It's just a thing that we do. Some don't. It's just hey, it's just a human condition, my friends. Back not too long ago, through the 19th century, homosexuality wasn't a category. It was a homosexual, a gay man or a lesbian woman. That was not a thing. We created those categories to put people into for different reasons. So the argument here is that in the 1800s, again, with the birth of modern science and the kind of birth of empiricism, like we can predict things, put things into boxes, we see the invention of the homosexual. Remember, difference between sexual identity and sexuality. So not that people were just all of a sudden started doing homosexual things. No, not that. They have always been and always will be doing homosexual things. But the invention of the category was new. Does that make any sense? And so we saw a shift. The book puts it good here. Where is it? We saw a shift then. Oh, maybe not. Where all of a sudden homosexuality became an identity and a sexual category, and treated like, and oftentimes embodied like, a different species. There's the straights, there's the homosexuals, there's the blah, 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 right? So we saw a separation of species. And this is in this argument ideological. It's not real. It's the humans are making up these borders and boundaries. This happened at the same time we were doing that across racial lines as well. That's the main argument. That before, in the 18th and the 19th century, we didn't see this categorization of people and surveillance of people's bodies that we did starting in the 17th centuries into today, right? With the kind of the invention of the homosexual, you also saw the quest for modern scientists to start categorizing humans. Like there are these types of humans, these types of humans, and these types of humans. Which Somerville argument is, and this broader queer constructivist argument is that's not the case. We are not separate species. We are all of one species. Not to say there aren't people from different areas that have different cultural characteristics and whatnot. Yes, that's a thing, of course. But the treating of difference as a different species in this argument is a broken consequence of science. Anyway, I like queer theory because it pushes us to the boundaries of our thoughts a lot of times. Not predicting things, not trying to understand things, rather trying to deconstruct the boundaries and borders that we've made along the way that are producing what we see now and what we think now and all that kind of stuff. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Okay, discussion question. So, queer theory challenging this idea of fixed categories, right? You see Somerville doing this across sexuality lines, sexual identity lines, and also racial lines. Where's another area that you think you could deconstruct or question certain categories and boxes that we've made along history or historical lines, right? Where are some other examples that you think maybe could deconstruct it to tell us a little bit more about how people are categorized? Political affiliation, gender, socioeconomic status. I don't know. Just throwing it out there. That's your discussion question for your reactions. Hope you all are doing well. See you soon. Bye.